Hello everybody, welcome back to Wolfeei. Today we're going to be looking at some MCC hot takes. I'm just going to go over every single reply that is here so far. It's a Reddit post you're looking at. We're going to go through them, and I'll give my takes on your takes. Well, some of you, assuming that you're watching this. Anyways, let's get started. So, the main post says, MCC hot takes. I was curious to see some hot takes that the Reddit community has about MCC. I mainly want to see hot takes exclusively about MCC, not regarding other events. Feel free to leave them here. So we're going to see MCC exclusive opinions. We're not going to go through the full detail because, as you can see, Daniel Ilta stepped in and gave his takes, which obviously he would know the most about how things work, but I don't have to explain his explanation because he knows more than me. So, anyways, let's get started. The first post, the top one, I don't know if it's the most upvoted one, but it's the first one I see. MCC Island Season 5 was terrible and did more harm to the server than good. To an extent, I think this is valid to say. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag because fishing seemed to be a really, really big step forward, and I still think it lingers with a lot of positivity attached to it, but a lot of the existing player base beforehand maybe lost interest or are a bit more frustrated with how the event or with how the server performs. As Daniel already mentioned, they're aware of this. They're going to look into it. Making a public server apparently is a lot more difficult than you may expect. I have learned this a little bit, not from experience obviously, but more from paying a lot of attention to my friends who've done server related stuff, and also from paying attention to MCC Island. Things are harder than it may seem, especially at a larger scale. I think when you're dealing with a private server, it's easier than it is with a massive public server like MCC Island. Furthermore, there's a bunch of replies. We can skip over it because people will say, I don't think they give a crap about MCC anymore. They just don't update it or anything. It's more complicated than it may seem, I think. My personal hot take is that in terms of best of all time ranking, Quig is better than Pete, and Quig is either first or second overall. I think to an extent that could be valid. I'll be super honest, I don't remember how good Quig actually was. I know he was a really impressive player, but also I think Pete has changed his approach to MCC and Minecraft events in general a little bit, mostly since Quig stopped playing, which I don't think is related, it's just coincidental. Pete used to, I think, it felt like Pete was a little bit more competitive back in the day. Now he's more, chill. He still, tries to play well, but he's not sweating over playing MCC, I think. And maybe I'm wrong to assume that, but that feels like that. So that's my take on that. So Quig better than Pete's hot take? Maybe. I don't know. Possibly. I mean, Quig was really good, so maybe not. I don't know. Maybe that's a pretty cool take. I have no clue. Next up, though. MCC is significantly behind the curve in how they score their games compared to other events. Many games give either way too many or way too few coins compared to the rest, and it doesn't accurately reflect performance a lot of the time. I think to an extent that's valid, but then also we have to take into account that not every event has to follow a certain formula. Obviously, there's a lot of opinions that were thrown around mostly a year or two ago regarding Block Wars and other events, for example, following the MCC format and how people didn't really like that. Now we're on the flip side where other events are kind of, pioneering a certain format in certain areas of the event where people hope MCC follows that lead, but they don't really need to do that because then it'll just be the same as everything else. So I think it's fine. I do think there are certain things that are a little crazy. For example, like Ace Race having a huge gap in points from like the top few, and then the gap shrinks. It's a decision that they make. There's probably a good reason behind it. I don't really love it, if I'm being perfectly honest, because of how many points you get given for being one of the top individual players. But it is what it is. If that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. Daniel here explains that they do score differently to other events, but that is intentional. He doesn't like the scoring system other events have adopted. To him, scoring is not a number that indicates who is objectively better than who. Scoring is the goal for that day, which I don't fully understand that, but sure. Scoring does not and should not have as its primary purpose to help you rank someone on a tier list. I do agree with that. We have also analyzed how games compare to one another, and it is perfectly where we wanted. Some games are meant to be safer and some are riskier, but all have a bit of variance. For the most part, I think this is very much a good thing to have, a definitive opinion and thought process behind how certain games should be scored. I do think and this could be wrong. I'm just saying, generally speaking, with, for example, PvP games, inherently PvP games are going to feel like they are a bit more high risk, high reward. Thus, they're going to feel like they might be a little too impactful on scoring, generally speaking. I don't know if that is the case with MCC. I do know that PvP games generally can have a lot of influence on how scoring changes, etc., especially with the multipliers, etc. However, if this is what MCC wants to do, that is what they want to do. I don't really agree necessarily with being significantly behind the curve. The only thing that was debatable is adding either assist points to PvP games or damage points, but I know that might be a little complex. So assist points would be nice in MCC PvP games, just to make it so kill stealing isn't as detrimental to some people's experience. Me personally, that is my opinion. Moving on. MCC Ender Cup was the only good event in Season 4, Extreme Low Comp, where it felt like a Season 1 event. Best season, by the way, and Fruit and Purple went crazy. Oh, Season 1 being the best season. Okay, I understand. Interesting. I mean, obviously I don't agree with that. That is definitely a hot take in my opinion. I don't think saying MCC Ender Cup was the only good event in Season 4 makes sense in my opinion, because that means the bar that you've set for MCC is very high. That is like peak MCC experience pretty much that you can get nowadays. Maybe with the exception for if you know, like some of the IRL events or something along those lines. Because the roster that was set up for that was way higher effort than the usual MCC. The gameplay was way higher effort than the usual MCC. Obviously, the whole, you know, the whole coat of paint around the event, the whole cohesiveness of the event, and theming and Minecraft involvement, etc., is very high effort, which I don't know. I definitely don't agree with saying Ender Cup is the only good event in Season 4. I do think, though, that generally speaking, the events in Season 4 personally felt like mostly they started off pretty strong, and then I think the later half of the year was a little weaker, with the exception for early and MCC Season 4 being Pride, where Pride's fine. I just didn't really think it stood out in terms of being impressive compared to some of the other events, like a kickoff, which was really nice with the extra effort in the roster. Obviously, I will be biased, but Twitch Rivals events I think are really, really interesting and really exciting to watch as well. Ender Cup, of course, is thrown in there. And then for the rest, like, Rising was okay. I think it's fine. Nothing really wrong with it. I personally am not the audience, I guess, for Rising. Then what else? Haunted Hoedown was fine. Just a regular event. For a regular event, it did a decent job of being a regular event. Past that, it is what it is. Party 2, well, actually, I see it here. Party 2 was whatever, really. I think it was just inconsistent, maybe, you could say. The gimmick didn't really work out, and it seemed like it relied on that gimmick working out to make the event a little bit more interesting overall. Regardless, I think Season 4 is a 50-50 hit or miss, but when they hit in Season 4, they hit big, and when they missed, they didn't miss that badly. So I think, generally speaking, Season 4 is a very good event. Very good season overall for MCC. Next up, MCC Party 2 was fine. The tile game was not great, but not as bad as people made it to be. There wasn't anything horrendously wrong with the tile game, though the bugs were irritating. The players just really should have taken 5 to 10 minutes to understand the rules before the event. I skimmed the article and knew what was going on. I lost some respect for certain creators for the way they complained about the event, as if it was solely Noxter's fault when it was a combination of the flaws of the tile, game design, and the players' lack of preparation. I do agree with this. I do think, to an extent, actually to a pretty high extent, this actually speaks on a lot of things, and I very recently reflected on this with WMCT, the Bedrock event that I played in. It seems like sometimes players will be very critical of a game's or of a part of the event's design purely because they themselves didn't understand how it worked, or because they themselves were behind everyone else in terms of understanding how things worked. I had this with the WMCT event, where it's a really good event, but because I intentionally didn't want to catch up to speed, essentially, in terms of knowing how everything works, I fell behind in understanding how some of the games properly functioned and what the optimal way to approach these games was, and also just, you know, mechanical skill issues. And that did sour the experience a little bit for me because I didn't understand as well as other people did. I could have understood as closer to as well as other people did, but because of my personal choice, I didn't. And that did result in me complaining a little bit about how things were going to a small extent, which I could have easily prevented. And I think this happens in other events as well. We see this happen in, MCC, Block Wars, PB sometimes as well, where sometimes somebody will not be fully caught up to speed and they will, as a result, complain about the event without really reflecting on why they had a certain issue happen or something along those lines, right? And I think MCC Party 2 does follow that same example, where obviously bugs are bad, and there was parts of the thing that, from a viewer standpoint might not be that interesting to watch. There's only one team per certain amount of time that's actually like doing something. For the rest, you're just kind of watching, etc. There's definitely flaws with the Party 2 mechanic, but I do think that a decent portion of the blame can be put on the players for not fully catching up to speed on how things work. However, in turn, you could also argue, should a party type of event, which implies for fun, silly, goofy, have a more complicated mechanic? I'm 50-50 on it. MCC could get away with it because a lot of people put a lot more effort into preparing for these events. But on the flip side as well, the event theming kind of implied like go with the flow. You're probably gonna hopefully pick up how it works along the way, and maybe some people didn't. So it is what it is. I do not agree with the sentiment that players should not have to prepare beforehand, especially when MCC Party 2 was a one-off and only required a 5 to 10 minute read. I miss the days where players actually strategized together before MCC started. This is, I think, is again, yeah, like I mentioned, 50-50. I think people should be able to go in blind and at least be able to properly compete. They shouldn't have to, they shouldn't be able to go in blind and master how the event works, right? People who prepare should, to an extent, be able to get rewarded for their extra efforts. But I don't think it should be mandatory for a party type of event, which implies more for fun, though that could just be a coincidental thing. Space Race. Space Race is my favorite Ace Race map up to this point, and also Season 3 is better than Season 2. Space Race being the favorite Ace Race map up to this point is interesting. I do think Space Race had some of the more iconic skips and stuff like that. The elytra at the finish line where people could make a huge play afterwards was pretty interesting. It was really cool to see people go for that and actually be able to hit it. I do think there are some flaws with Space Race. It would feel kind of outdated, I think, if it was played nowadays, which might just have to do with MCC, upping their standards nowadays. But I do think that if we saw Space Race appear, it would feel a little bit off. So I don't agree, but obviously that's just your opinion. I don't think it's super crazy to say that Space Race is one of your favorites, mainly because if you had certain creators maybe that had certain moments, obviously you'd probably think a bit more highly of it. I also feel like the MCC 14 issues maybe weigh a little bit too much on the Space Race experience overall, so I think it's fine. And then Season 3 being better than Season 2, I fully disagree. Season 3 is... I've said this pretty often. It is probably my standout least favorite season MCC has done. Least favorite year of MCC 2023. Probably my least favorite overall, because it felt like a decline, generally speaking, on the MCC experience. It felt like it was mostly a rinse and repeat situation. Yes, there were some, standout events that had a little bit more effort going into them. And I don't think every event in Season 3 was bad. I don't even think many of the Season 3 events were bad. I just think it was lackluster compared to previous MCC seasons as a whole, in my opinion, at least. I do think stuff like Scuffed and stuff like, Scuffed was in that era? Yeah, Scuffed and then Party at the time I thought were cool. So yeah. I think Season 3 has some things to like, but I don't think better than Season 2 makes sense, especially if you don't label a specific part of Season 2. I think that's crazy. Hole in the Wall is the best movement game. Look, man, I'm biased, but I can't say I disagree. If I had to pick out of all the MCC movement games, which one I'd like to play most, Hole in the Wall's got to be top 2, at least. Depending on which games you all can include with, being movement-oriented or not. Because, for example, Rocket Sleeve is sometimes debated to be a PvP game, which I don't really agree with, but whatever. I think it's up there. I don't think that's a crazy hot take, but also I think maybe, you know, that I think Ace Race is going to generally be the number one answer for a lot of people because they like racing games. Some people will maybe like a Parkour Warrior or Parkour Tag more. I like Hole in the Wall, so I agree. All right. The best MCC in the best MCCs in season 4 were the LAN events with Twitch rivals. While it sucks, I'll never be able to see it like that. It's an interesting twist for MCC, and besides the build mode scoring hiccup, it's fun to see the players interacting in person. I agree. I think it's really fun. Even when I obviously haven't been able to attend either of the NA-based ones, it seems like a really fun overall experience, and I think that's just cool. They mentioned Toby beating up Foolish. That was funny from the first one. Fruit and Curry shouting at each other. That is funny. Me and Hole in the Wall and Rocket Swift dominating. Sure, that's obviously for, you know, a first time playing, pretty interesting. Toby meeting Scar in person is cool. Photos of Lifesteal members meeting up, and same for the Hermits. Lifesteal members meeting up, would that relate to? I guess it's just a TwitchCon thing, but sure, yeah. Season 4 gave us Halloween back, but no Christmas. Ender Cup was advertised to have the best well-known Minecraft players around, but that was a lie and it went on forever. We all know why Party 2 was a long disaster with their Connect 4 attempt. Pride, okay, hold on, let me dissect this. So they get Halloween, but no Christmas. Yeah, no Christmas was a little bit of a bummer, but especially with how Party 2 aged, I can see why people are bummed out about that. But I think it's fine to, you know, only pick either Halloween or Christmas each year. Now, Ender Cup advertised to have the best well-known Minecraft players around, but that was a lie, and it went on forever. This is kind of valid, but also you have to understand from a marketing standpoint with some of the people that were included, it makes sense. It makes sense, like what they mentioned makes sense to an extent. Yeah, of course, you know, there's small changes you could have made to make the roster actually more well-known or actually better or whatever, but it is what it is. I think overall Undercup's roster was really impressive. I thought it was really cool, and I think it ended up, I think if we look back at it, it's going to age really well, generally speaking, aside from the hypothetical people getting canceled, which we're not going to think about that, right? But hypothetically speaking, if nothing goes wrong from a personal standpoint with any of these players, I think the overall connective roster is going to be really cool. Teams like Orange and teams like Lime and Orange is Twitch rivals. Teams like Lime and teams like Pink and etc. Like teams like the Cyan team or whatever. Some of the cooler ones that people really liked are going to age really well, I think. And overall, I don't think there is a team in Ender Cup that generally is lackluster or underwhelming. We all know why Part 2 was a long disaster, of course. Also, yeah, it went on forever. There was a lot of breaks, but that is, you know, it happens. Yeah, Connect 4 temp was whatever. Pride and a KO were good. Watching my Pride chickens being punched was funny. LOL. Valid. And while having coaches for Rising 3 was a good idea, I did not agree with coaches being allowed to stream. That takes the whole premise of Rising Stars away, so I opted out of that. I'm going to give a take here that may be partially invalid. I think for the most part, the majority of people that will watch the coaches for the Rising events weren't going to watch Rising if the coaches weren't there. I don't recall how many viewers every coach had, but it felt like generally the people were pulling roughly the same amount of viewers they would on their regular streams, if not like only slightly more, which kind of shows that like it probably isn't that big of a difference in terms of viewership. Also, we may have to be honest and reflect that obviously the base MCC, the viewer base of MCC at its core has shrunk a lot over the years, and I think the Rising players just have less viewers to share amongst themselves. Obviously as well, teams like Pink having some more standout creators that may be a little bit more recognizable are gonna maybe, you know, be a magnet for all the viewers to go to, plus then having the coaches. It does kind of leave a few, like a lower amount of total viewers for the rest. However, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think if you remove the coaches, some of the interest in the event may have declined and decreased. There was a good amount of, people overlapping with their coaches. For example, JoJo with her team or other people with their team. JoJo is a prime example of somebody who, to this day, still seems to, tag along with their Rising 3 teams from time to time. And I do think there's, to an extent, it shows that the coaches were a decent idea. I don't think it's a perfect, flawless system, but I think it helped up the interest in the event a little bit. Because not only are you considering which team makes it in, it's also like, who's the coach for this team when the team announcements were happening. And that's pretty interesting. Anyways, I need my beauty sleep. MCC's early in the morning for me, so something needed to be on the chopping block. Fair enough. That is totally valid. I think MCC is better off doing fewer events than a lot. I love Season 4, especially because of how few events we actually got. Each one was very special, whereas the second half of Season 2 and 3 were all kind of copy-pasted. I kind of just fully agree with that. I don't think MCC should do less events than they did in Season 4, though. I think Season 4 is good in terms of the amount of events. Maybe one more if they want to throw in 3, regular events instead of 2, and obviously have no Ender Cup. But I do think that not just MCC, this would also apply to like a Block Wars or whatever. The more events in general come to to rise in popularity, the more I think that especially the major events should scale back and try to focus more on making each event stand out a little bit, because otherwise either every event's going to be the same in terms of your own events are all going to be the same, which is I think is what Block Wars is sometimes running into, especially recently with some of the more frequent occurrences. Or every event compared to each other is going to feel similar. Also, there's event fatigue, etc., where I just think having less events helps. Of course, with MCC doing that type of change and maybe Block Wars doing that type of change, it does make the overall event scene probably a little bit less active because the largest events pull in the most attention, generally speaking. So if the largest events are on a less frequent schedule, it does mean that the overall attention going to events is a bit lower, but it is what it is. I think for the sake of longevity, I think it's the better choice to scale back on how many events are being hosted. Here we have a big one. Positive development resources being split between MCC, MCCI, and Bedrock maps is actually a good thing for Noxer in the context of MCC specifically, not just financially. Having an entire team dedicated to only one goal, while good for efficiency, inherently narrows creative scope to that goal. But working on projects in other contexts like maps, Bedrock events, or a public server allows for unique ideas and approaches to be thought of and tried for MCC that wouldn't have been considered otherwise. Okay. In my opinion, this is a part of the reason that even with PB and Block Wars massively improving recently, their gameplay polish and productivity consistently still pales in comparison to MCC. No hate, I very much enjoy both events because those dev teams are almost entirely, if not entirely, event focused, while Noxer has a broader area of work. I think that comparison is very dishonest, in my opinion, because you have to look at the Nox crew as a team compared to these other event teams and look at what the Nox crew did before they started to do an event and then compared it to the other teams, because these other teams like Block Wars' staff team and PB staff team formed around wanting to get creative and make a Minecraft event, whereas MCC already existed, or Nox crew already existed as a team, and then with Scott's influence decided to branch off and make MCC happen. And obviously with the success, especially early on, they wanted to continue it forward because it was really popular. It's beneficial, at least at the time, to work on. It's very, again, dishonest to claim that MCC is only higher in quality because they are not only focusing on events, they're focusing on MCCI and Bedrock, while these other events are focusing on that. The reason MCC is so much higher in quality is because they just have a lot more talent on board in terms of visuals and experience regarding that. PB staff team only recently learned some stuff because of Dragon Pit. Block Wars' staff team partially lacking in terms of the modeling department, at least recently or semi-recently. So that's kind of the reason why this is happening. This is why like a biome battle also is able to shine, because biome battle is led by some people who have past experience in non-event formats and are able to bring that to the event format, which partially is what you're saying, right? Yeah, MCC can stand out because they have this experience, or more so, they are not fully event focused, but it's a little dishonest in the way it's being compared. You have to look at why are they able to what's it called? Why are they able to make these games stand out a little bit more? And that's partially why, at least. There's other things as well, like full-time employees, etc., but we don't need to get into that. Between all non-MCC events, there are maybe 5 to 6 MCC scope and caliber actual roster games out there. Blitz, Hunt, Extraction, Temple, Lockout, Chalice Chase, Factory Frenzy, maybe Order Up, compared to like 12-ish or the 16 active in MCC. Do I agree with that? No, I don't. I don't really. I also don't think that's a necessary comparison. I don't really think that makes sense, because I think if you throw Temple Lockout into MCC, it would feel out of place. If you throw Order Up into MCC, it would feel out of place. I don't really think that you can compare these games from other events to the MCC scope, because regardless of the quote-unquote MCC scope, they would feel out of place if they were to be thrown in an MCC, in which being up to the MCC scope should imply to an extent that they would be able to, exist alongside the MCC game roster without it feeling very out of place. I don't know. It's a privilege of past success and additional resources for sure, but I think it's still worth noting as part of a successful approach. Yeah, I mean, I said this too, so that makes sense to an extent. Neutral, Party 2 is better than Party 1. The targeting aspect of items in Party 1 outweighed its fun, silly element, and the fun from lightheartedly taking the mick out of the tile game while still trying at it wasn't even a bad game, just an odd fit outweighed its confusion. Feel bad for B-Dub's experience, though. Was targeting a big issue in Party 1? I guess to an extent you probably, because you could steal crowns, right? I guess to an extent that could be a problem, but targeting was also a problem in Party 2, because teams could just cross team on the board, and if a team isn't able to win, they can just make it so whatever team's in like second or first maybe doesn't get top 2 and doesn't make the finale. So I don't think in terms of targeting that it's that big of a gap. I personally think Party 1 is a lot better. I do agree though, feel bad for B-Dubs to have finally a MCC return, and it is one of the worst events, or one of the quote-unquote worst events MCC has hosted in recent history. And then negative, Scuffed has had a net negative impact on MCC. Doesn't mean I wouldn't like to see a Scuffed 2 executed better, but beginning of Season 3 was the wrong time for that event, and it both bled over into MCC 30, hole in the wall to exclusively neutral and negative reactions, and accelerated the taking of sides between competitive and for fun fans, and that conflict at the beginning of the season rather than at the end, where it would have softened with everyone's missed MCC on the break. I don't really think I disagree with that. I do think that if Scuffed was at the end of the season for MCC Season 3, it would have probably gone over maybe slightly better than at the start. But then we have to look at Party 2 being at the end of MCC Season 4, and that kind of left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth regarding MCC Season 4. That's why some of the people that are talking about season quality between every MCC season, Season 4 is being ranked so much lower because of the most recent experience being probably the weakest of the entire season. So, to an extent, I don't know if I agree. Maybe I do agree, but maybe I don't. Imagine if the last event of the season was Ender Cup. It would have been way better, right? So, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Next up, Season 3 is... Well, this probably implies significantly better, unless they just mean better. Season 3, significantly better than Season 4. The only reason I could see that take happening is if you like the quantity of events more. So if that is the case, that's probably partially valid. I don't agree, but okay. Block Wars is significantly bigger than MCC in size nowadays. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think... Factually speaking, the regular MCC roster is bigger than the regular Block Wars roster in terms of who actively plays, and especially actively signs up on their own accord. Block Wars does have to do has to put a lot of effort into getting people involved with the event, mostly in terms of them not really being aware of signing up, and mostly just expecting an invite when the time is right. MCC doesn't have that problem. Pretty much as a whole, so well, at least mostly doesn't. So I don't know. I don't agree with that. This was funny though, because at the end of Season 3, that was a big debate when we had Iron Mouse announced for Rookies 2. I don't think considering how Season 4 has gone for MCC, I don't think that debate has really been brought up. But I also don't really think it matters that much. So I don't know. Meltdown and Sky Battle just don't work for a lot of the roster, therefore they should be seen in the same category as Build Mart back then. Ooh, okay. Interesting. This, I can partially agree with this take, depending on what MCC does in Season 5. If they want to cater to a lower comp experience a little bit more, for example, a bit more hermit oriented, or maybe a more just casual oriented events, or maybe a mix, right? Kind of what Blockers has, where you throw in a rookies-esque event, or maybe you throw in a higher comp event, or something along those lines, where things can shake up a little bit more, which I do think could be interesting. Then maybe a Meltdown or a Sky Battle could be scaled down in terms of how frequently it's played. It is a little difficult to really pinpoint as well, because, for example, with a variety roster in like an Ender Cup, Meltdown could be good, right? There's people like Masayoshi and that team or like Toast and Tina and Purpled, where because of what they do outside of playing Minecraft, they could actually hold themselves in Meltdown pretty decently well and actually make for pretty interesting content. But then also that relies on those specific types of players being involved, etc. So to an extent, I can agree. Maybe like a Sky Battle could be in, a little less if there were to be more casual events. Meltdown, depending on the roster as well. Maybe Meltdown could be scaled back for some of the regular events and only be used for the higher comp and lower comp events, because it could apply to that, but I don't know. Canon events are always better than the non-canon MCC events, in contrast to Blockers and PB and basically any other event. Hold on. Canon events are always better than non-canon MCC events, in contrast to Blockers and PB and basically any other event. So canon MCCs are better than regular MCCs in comparison to regular Block Wars compared to quote-unquote non-canon, which is just called a spin-off, by the way. Spin-off Block Wars, and then PB. I mean, the PB one is a little difficult to pinpoint because PB's had one spin-off, maybe two. One of them people don't really even understand or realize has happened much, and one of them is Dragon Pit, so I don't really know about that one. Factually speaking, yeah, on average, PB's special events have been better than MCC special events because PB has done Dragon Pit. What? Crazy. Block Wars, I mean, if you like rookies a lot, maybe. I mean, to an extent, I could maybe see that, because with MCC's special events, or the non-canon events, which I'll just call them special events. Everyone knows what special event means. I think there's some inconsistency in how they're treated and how they're perceived. Though I can't say that a Block Wars Rookies is a better experience or a more cooler experience than MCC Twitch Rivals, for example, right? Like, that's also maybe not a fair comparison, but you know what I mean. So, I don't know. Rising 3 is my favorite Rising. I don't agree, but hey, that's valid. If you want to see more of a community-oriented Rising roster, that is totally valid. That makes sense. Next up, MCC 17 Orange, while having an iconic win, is not as iconic as some of the other winning teams, or even just teams, due to most of the fandom attention being on a single player Korean. This is in contrast to teams like Pink 9, in which there is a more equal distribution of spotlight, or Hermit winning teams like Blue 9 and Aqua 29, and which every member gets acknowledged. Iconic win does not equal iconic team. I don't disagree with that. I mean, I don't care as much either, but I don't disagree that, like, one player winning shouldn't make a whole team considered iconic, right? Korean having his iconic win shouldn't necessarily mean that it's an iconic winning team. I don't disagree with that. I don't think that's a crazy take. That makes sense. It's definitely not going to be a popular take because, obviously there's going to be a lot of bias involved, but I don't think that's a crazy take. That's like saying that in Block Wars 13, me getting my first win makes that team an iconic winning team. Maybe it is because, the scope and the scale of which iconic Block Wars wins goes maybe isn't as high as MCC, but still, I don't disagree with this one. Hermit team-wise, Blue 9 is generally on another level due to being fondly remembered by all four of them to the point that they matched their TCG cards. Sure, yeah, to an extent I can agree. Blue 9 is iconic, of course. As much as I was around in the community, I don't recall the full reason why it's so iconic, so I can't really judge whether it is that much more iconic than Korean winning, but oh well. Season 1 and Season 2 are way better than Season 3 and 4. This is the coldest take of all time. I mean, I guess. I like... Season 1 and Season 2 are what feels like the most iconic era of MCC. In terms of quality, I've already said it. Season 3 is my least favorite. Season 4 is probably top 2 for me in terms of overall experience. Probably, at least. Maybe that could change. But maybe. I don't know. I think from a Reddit standpoint, this isn't that crazy of a take. Obviously, as mentioned by the op of this post, but Season 2 and Season 1 combined probably is better than Season 3 and Season 4 combined, but I don't know about way better. There's a lot more popularity, a lot more activity, a lot more iconic players, a lot more going on, which is a big factor as to how things may feel. But I also think that if you put from an event standpoint, some of the gameplay from, for example, MCC Season 1 in the modern day, the event would not stand out as much as it did at the time. And it wouldn't be as impressive as it was at the time. I think a lot of people don't really appreciate how much things have improved, have smoothened out in terms of how the event functions right now. And it just depends on what specific aspect of the event you prefer most. What is your favorite part of MCC? If it's the players, sure, Season 1 and Season 2 could be considered way better than Season 3 and 4 because it was more popular and there were more iconic people that featured in these events, probably on an average, on average in terms of who was included. But if you like the gameplay side of things more, I do think that Season 3 and Season 4 may have had a little bit more to offer, but maybe not. That's my opinion. Or more so if you look at cohesiveness and balancing as well, etc. I think some of the later events are a little bit better than the earlier ones. MCC has a pretty bad player roster now. It used to be way better. The teams and events are just forgettable. Like, I remember an MCC from 4 years ago better than the one from 4 months ago. That's a personal thing. My take on this is that I can't call the MCC roster bad because it exists for a reason. It's shaped the way it is for a pretty valid reason. Depending on your perspective of what MCC should be like, I can agree that maybe it's lackluster in some elements in terms of being the Minecraft event, which it does advertise to be. I'm fairly sure. I think on Twitter they call themselves like the Minecraft event or something along those lines, where it's mostly considered the Minecraft event, right? There is a lack of modern representation, or at least on an active basis, some lack of modern representation in the roster. It doesn't really properly reflect Minecraft, I think, to an extent. I do think there are things people they could add that would more, properly reflect Minecraft. But also, it's Scott's decision to invite certain people or not. It's Scott's decision to include certain people more frequently or not. And that's fine. That's up to him. If people aren't a fan of that, it is what it is. There's plenty of people who are okay with that, so I don't think MCC should need to change it. But I wouldn't complain at all if they decided that they just invited a bunch of new people that are, more representative of modern Minecraft, like Lifesteal members or maybe like the Realm, etc., right? To kind of freshen things up a little bit more. But not my responsibility, so we'll see. And then finally, adding more stronger players is not the issue, it's adding the wrong players. What would that mean exactly? I don't really know how that makes sense. I think adding stronger players to an extent is a problem, mostly because of how cohesive the MCC roster currently is and how attached some people are to the current MCC roster. For example, I'm just going to name names. This is just an example. Don't take it too seriously, of course, right? If Radoons were to if Radoons were to be added to MCC, he obviously would be a higher tier player, whether it's S tier or high A or whatever you want to call it. He's a top 10 contender consistently, most likely. He would probably, have to alternate in terms of a spot. Or hypothetically, let's say Radoons is going to be in 2/3 of the events because he represents, Lifesteal SMP and popularized or is more popular in the modern Minecraft scene. He would take the spot of somebody like let's think of like Dave, for example, right? Dave would maybe play less. Maybe he would play only twice or once a year instead of 3 or 4 times. Now I don't really know how often Dave plays or like a JoJo maybe would play like 1 or 2 events less, or maybe like Hannah, well, probably not Hannah, but because of lifesteal, but you know what I mean. Like there's an extent, to an extent, it does affect some of the existing viewer base, and maybe to an extent, could upset some of the existing viewer base, and there's not really a way to fix that once you've invited someone, which I can very much speak on in terms of Blockwar's experience. Plenty of times when doing team streams and team announcement streams, people are upset or not really super happy with certain people not being included, which isn't my fault because some of them just don't sign up, right? But some people expect certain people to be in because those are the people they most look forward to seeing in, which usually is going to be the higher tier players. And if you have too many higher tier players, it means that people have to cycle in and out, which just means that some of the people that you most want to see are going to be unable to play most of the time, or at least some of the time, because other people take up their spot. Because you can't just have too many good players in the roster, because that ruins the overall event experience, i.e. look at Season 3 of MCC. That was way too high comp. Anyways, those are the hot takes that were on the board here. There may be a new one if I refresh, but I don't care. So let me know your thoughts on MCC hot takes and on my takes on the hot takes. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.